The storm over Monaco was merciless. Rain came down not as drops but as whips of water, lashing against the glittering coastline until the city looked half drowned in its own wealth. The golden lights of the harbor trembled like dying embers, blurred by sheets of water. The sea raged, hurling waves against the breakwater with an anger that seemed to echo the heavens. It was the kind of night where even the most reckless souls lock themselves inside, surrendering the streets to the fury of nature. Yet one figure ran. Isabella, 7 years old, fragile as a candle in the storm, darted barefoot through the alleys. Each step splashed water up her thin legs, her soaked dress clinging like a second skin. Her breaths came sharp, broken, almost drowned out by the growl of thunder. Against her chest she gripped a ragged toy rabbit so tightly her knuckles turned white. It was all she had left of a life she could barely remember, a talisman against a world that had long stopped being kind. A flash of lightning tore the night open, and for an instant her face was revealed. Wide eyes filled with fear and something darker, a hopelessness far too heavy for a child. Her hair plastered to her cheeks, her lips trembling as she stumbled forward. Moments ago, angry voices had chased her through the streets. Those men had finally stopped, but the terror hadn't. Now she wasn't running from them. She was running from the storm, from hunger gnawing at her stomach, from the crushing loneliness that had shadowed her short life. Above the marina, the Carter estate rose like a sentinel, a palace of glass and stone, its walls glowing faintly under the security lights. To the city, it was a monument to power, to wealth untouchable. To Isabella, it was salvation. She pushed forward, rain stinging her skin like knives until the black outline of the iron fence loomed before her. With a desperate cry, she squeezed through a narrow gap, the metal scraping her arms raw. Blood mixed with rain, but she didn't stop. She vanished into the manicured gardens, the hedges bending beneath the weight of water. The roses tore at her as she crawled into their cover. Thorns pricked her skin, her small body shivering violently as she pressed herself into the mud. For a moment she dared to believe she could stay hidden until dawn, unseen, forgotten, safe. Her breathing slowed, fogging in the chilled air. The storm's roar became a lullaby of exhaustion. Then, an engine. A low, steady hum cut through the storm. Headlights flared against the rain as a sleek black car rolled toward the garage, its polished surface reflecting shards of lightning. The vehicle moved with slow authority, as though even the weather obeyed its presence. Behind the wheel was William Carter. At 45, his name commanded respect across continents: London, Hong Kong, New York. In the ruthless world of real estate, he was known as unshakable, brilliant, disciplined to the point of coldness. Tonight, he returned to his fortress alone. His staff were shadows that came and went. His life was steel, marble, and silence. Success had bought him everything but the one thing he never admitted he lacked: human connection. The car eased to a halt. William stepped out, keys in hand, adjusting his coat as the rain streamed around him. The storm didn't touch him. At least that was how it looked. His mind was already ahead, calculating reports, numbers, tomorrow's meeting in Geneva. Until a voice, small, fragile, cutting through thunder like a blade. "Sir, may I sleep in your dog's house tonight?" William froze, his breath caught, his body still. For an instant he thought it was the storm mocking him. Slowly he turned. His eyes searched the dim driveway, scanning shadows. And then he saw her, Isabella, a tiny figure soaked to the bone, standing not 10 feet away. Her lips trembled with each word, her shoulders hunched against the cold. Rain ran down her face, but it couldn't hide the desperation in her eyes. "I'll be quiet," she added quickly, her voice cracking, "just until the storm passes." For the first time in years, the tycoon's mind went blank. He had conquered towers of steel, brought empires to their knees, closed billion-dollar deals without hesitation. Yet now, a child barely reaching his waist had undone him completely. with nothing but a plea for shelter in a doghouse that didn't even exist. And as he looked at her, something in his chest shifted. An ache long buried, memories long locked away. The storm raged on, but for William Carter, the world had gone silent. Now the heavy doors, once closed only for billionaires and business magnates, stood open for a trembling child who had asked for nothing more than a corner of shelter. Isabella hesitated, glancing down at her dripping dress, then up at the towering man before her. I'll get everything dirty," she whispered, her voice almost lost in the echo of the marble hall. "Furniture can be cleaned," William Carter replied, his tone firm but unexpectedly gentle. And for the first time in years, he felt the truth of his own words. Slowly, cautiously, Isabella stepped inside. Each step left tiny wet footprints across the polished marble floor, prints that seemed less like stains and more like declarations. This house was no longer just his. She looked up. The grand chandelier glittered above her like a cascade of frozen stars, the sweeping staircase curling upward as if into another world. Her mouth parted in awe, but no words came. William watched her, a strange mix of pride and shame twisting in his chest. He had spent decades amassing this palace of steel and marble, filling it with treasures that screamed of power, yet it had never looked so alive until reflected in the eyes of a child. "My name is William," he said, gently closing the door behind them. "You're safe here tonight." Isabella hugged her ragged rabbit tighter, nodding once. She didn't thank him. Not yet. Trust was not something she could give so easily. Still, in her silence he felt the unfamiliar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Something had shifted inside him, as irrevocable as the storm battering Monaco's coast. Outside, thunder roared. Inside, a fragile calm bloomed. Warm light spilled across spotless marble, chandeliers glistened, and every surface gleamed as though untouched by time. To Isabella, it felt like another universe. She stood frozen just inside the threshold, dripping onto the floor, uncertain whether she even had the right to take another step. The scent of polished wood and faint cologne replaced the mildew and smoke that clung to her clothes. William Carter shrugged off his coat and placed it on a chair, his eyes fixed not with impatience but with quiet curiosity. "Come," he said, his voice steady but softer now. He guided her past oil paintings worth more than most homes, past velvet drapes that muted the storm outside. Her fingers brushed along the wall as if she needed to prove the house was real. Then he opened a door, and she gasped. The guest bathroom shone like a temple, marble tiles stretched from floor to ceiling, their polished surfaces reflecting golden light. A bathtub, large enough to be a pool in her world, filled slowly with steaming water as William turned the gleaming faucets. The sound of rushing water filled the air, but here it meant something she had never known. Safety. "Warm. Water," Isabella whispered as if uttering a forbidden word. She froze at the threshold, unable to believe the sight belonged to her. William noticed, quietly pulling thick Egyptian cotton towels from a cabinet and placing them beside the tub. "It's for you," he said simply. Her eyes widened. "For me?" "Yes," he nodded. "Take a bath. It will help you feel warm again." Her lips quivered with the urge to protest as though kindness itself was dangerous. But slowly, with trembling steps, she crossed the threshold. She reached out, her small hand hovering over the rising steam, and smiled faintly as it curled around her fingers. William excused himself, leaving the door slightly ajar so she wouldn't feel trapped. Alone in the hallway, he found himself unsettled by how deeply her wonder struck him. This house had been designed to intimidate, to impress, to display wealth. Yet tonight it served a far humbler purpose, giving a child her first taste of comfort. When Isabella finally emerged, wrapped in a towel far too big for her, she looked like a different child. Her hair fell in damp waves, her cheeks flushed with warmth, her eyes brighter though still cautious. Without a word, William handed her a plain white shirt from his wardrobe. So oversized it fell to her knees. She slipped it on, smoothing the fabric as though it were made of silk. "You must be hungry," he said. Isabella nodded silently, but the soft growl of her stomach spoke for her. In the gleaming kitchen, refrigerators brimmed with caviar, cheeses, wines that cost more than most homes. None of it seemed right. After a pause, William chose simplicity. He heated milk, whisking in chocolate until it frothed, and set a plate of cookies on the counter. The sweet aroma spread through the air, filling the mansion with something it had never truly known. Warmth that felt like home. Isabella perched on the edge of the tall chair, her small legs swinging but never touching the ground. When the warm mug was placed in front of her, she hesitated, gripping it with both hands as though it might be stolen at any second. The first sip made her eyes flutter shut, and when she opened them again, tears glimmered at the corners. "It's too good," she whispered, her voice breaking. William watched in silence, something tight and unfamiliar twisting in his chest. She ate slowly, savoring each cookie, but when she thought he wasn't watching, her hand slipped one into her pocket, a habit born from survival. He didn't stop her. Instead, a quiet sorrow weighed on him, the realization that a child so young had already learned to hoard food against tomorrow's hunger. When her tiny body began to sag with exhaustion, she asked softly, "Can I sleep on the couch? I promise I won't make a mess." The weight of her words struck him. She was asking permission just to exist in his space, never demanding, never assuming. "You'll sleep in the guest room," he answered firmly, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Her eyes widened in disbelief, as though he had just offered her a palace. He led her up the sweeping staircase to a room rarely entered. The bed loomed before her, vast and draped in linen so white they seemed to glow. Isabella froze at the doorway, whispering, "It's too big." "It's yours tonight," William said. He adjusted the pillows awkwardly, revealing how long it had been since he'd cared for anyone but himself. She climbed into the enormous bed, vanishing beneath the folds of the blanket, her ragged rabbit tucked tightly under her arm. As he switched off the light, leaving only a lamp's soft glow, he heard her voice break the quiet. "Thank you, Mr. William." He stopped mid-step. Gratitude from a child with nothing cut deeper than any accolade he had ever earned. He closed the door gently, his footsteps echoing through the silent hall. That night, William sat alone in his study, surrounded by contracts and reports, but the numbers blurred before his eyes. His thoughts returned again and again to the small figure curled in the guest bed. Something about her presence unsettled the fortress he had built within himself. It wasn't pity. It was heavier, sharper, more personal. For the first time in years, he wondered whether all his success, his solitude, had ever truly been enough. Down the hall, Isabella slept more soundly than she had in months. No dreams of streets or hunger haunted her. She dreamed of warmth, of a voice that hadn't turned her away, of a house that might hold a corner just for her. Invisible wounds couldn't heal in one night, but the storm outside had given her more than shelter. It had given her a glimpse of belonging. And for William, it had cracked open a door he never knew he'd locked. The rain softened, its rhythm lulling the mansion into uneasy peace. Morning spilled across the Carter estate, flooding the marble floors with golden light. For the first time in memory, Isabella awoke without shivering. She stretched beneath the heavy blanket, blinking into the sunlight, disoriented by comfort itself. The night before felt like a dream. The bath, the food, the towering bed that had cradled her. She hugged her rabbit and whispered to it, as though reassuring herself it had truly happened. Downstairs, William sat at the long dining table, a newspaper folded beside his steaming coffee. Yet his eyes never lingered on the print. They drifted to the hallway, waiting for small footsteps. When Isabella appeared, wearing the oversized shirt he had given her, hair smoothed by a timid hand, something stirred within him. The house no longer seemed so cavernous, no longer so empty. Breakfast was simple: toast, eggs, fruit. Isabella ate quietly, posture tense, saving scraps of bread at the edge of her plate. Old scars lingered in small gestures. Watching her, William made a decision. "You need proper clothes," he said gently but firmly. She blinked at him, uncertain, until he added, "We'll go together." Just a few things. The sleek car carried them toward Milan, gliding over sunlit roads until the city rose around them, its bustle, its elegance. Isabella pressed her face to the glass, eyes wide at the spires, the shop fronts, the cafes spilling onto the streets. When William guided her into a clothing store, she faltered at the threshold, overwhelmed by a world of colors and textures she had never known. Isabella chose the cheapest item she could find, tugging gently at William's sleeve to show him a plain dress and a pair of jeans. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "These are enough, Mr. William. You don't have to spend so much." He studied her for a long moment, then placed a steady hand on her small shoulder. "Isabella, you deserve more than just enough." It was in that instant, amid the low hum of the store, that fragments of her past began to resurface. As they walked toward the register, Isabella's body suddenly stiffened. Her small hand tightened on his arm with desperate strength. Following her gaze, William looked out to the street. 3 men stood there leaning against the wall, their eyes locked onto her with predatory focus. Isabella's breath came faster, her voice trembling as she whispered, "It's them." The men pushed off the wall and began moving through the crowd. William reacted instantly, pulling her close. He stepped outside, his presence imposing, protective. The largest man, bearded and grinning with menace, was the first to speak. "Looks like you found our little friend. You've been following her." William's voice sliced through the air, sharp and cold. "She belongs to us," another sneered, spitting on the ground. "This isn't about bread. It's about respect. She crossed into our streets. Now she owes a fury rose in William, raw and unfamiliar." "She's a child," he said, his voice steady even as his pulse thundered. "You will not come near her again." The men laughed, hard, mocking. Passers-by glanced briefly, then turned away, pretending not to see. In that moment, William understood. His wealth, his power, his reputation meant nothing here. This was a place ruled by fear, where a frightened girl could vanish in daylight and the world would remain silent. He pulled Isabella behind him, her fingers digging into his sleeve. The men advanced, their laughter shifting into threat. "We can make her disappear," the bearded one murmured, "unless you'd like to make it worth our while." The extortion was thinly veiled, menace wrapped as business. William reached for his wallet, not out of belief in money's power, but to buy a moment of time. He handed over a stack of bills, his glare ice cold. "Take this, and don't come back." They accepted, but their smiles only widened. "Money doesn't change what she is," one of them taunted. "Street rats always crawl back." Isabella trembled, eyes brimming with tears. William felt the weight of her terror settle into his bones. He guided her quickly to the car, locking the doors with a sharp snap. As the engine roared, she buried her face against his sleeve, whispering through her sobs, "They won't stop. They never stop." Back at the mansion, silence hung between them. William poured her a glass of water, his hand steady though his thoughts raced. He knew those men would not vanish. They would circle back, waiting for the smallest weakness. That evening, a visitor arrived, a social worker from Naples, drawn by whispers that a child had been seen entering the Carter estate. Her name was Clara Rossi, a woman with kind eyes and the calm of someone who had carried too many stories like Isabella's. She asked careful questions, where Isabella had come from, what William intended. Isabella clung to the arm of his chair, her voice breaking. He takes care of me. Please, don't send me back. Clara listened quietly, pen unmoving. She explained the procedures, the need for documents, the slow machinery of law. William felt himself bristle. Bureaucracy deciding the fate of a child already scarred by neglect enraged him more than the threats in Milan. Later, another storm arrived, this time in the form of his sister. Victoria Carter, sharp as steel, swept in from London without warning. A woman of politics and reputation, she filled the hall with her voice. "William, what madness is this? A child from the streets? Do you understand the scandal this could cause?" Her words struck harder than the thug's threats. For Victoria, everything was legacy, power, the Carter name. She urged him to let social services take the child, to protect the empire. But when William looked at Isabella, curled small on the couch, her eyes wide with terror at the thought of being taken, he knew his choice was already made. The streets had carved their shadows into her life. He would not let them reclaim her. The night stretched on, heavy with unanswered questions and looming threats. Yet, as Isabella drifted into uneasy sleep, William sat beside her, his resolve hardening. Wealth would never be enough. To protect her, he would need more than money. He would need courage long buried, and the will to fight a battle far beyond contracts and boardrooms. The shadows of the streets had found them, and William knew his life could never return to what it had been. Not after Isabella. Not now. The days after the confrontation in Milan were fraught with unease. William reinforced security around the estate, yet the fear in Isabella's eyes lingered. Each time a car slowed outside, her body tensed. Each sudden sound made her flinch. She tried to be brave, but her silence betrayed the storm within. He told her she was safe, though deep down he doubted his own words. Shadows don't vanish just because doors are locked. One afternoon, while William was occupied with lawyers about the possibility of guardianship, Isabella accompanied Clara Rossi to a routine medical appointment in the city. He almost refused, but Clara insisted it was necessary, promising her protection. Isabella, with a timid smile, urged him to let her go. "It's only a checkup." "I'll be fine." She wasn't. Hours later, the call came. Clara's trembling voice shattered him. "William, they took her. They took Isabella." He froze as her sobs spilled the details. 3 men had ambushed them outside the clinic, one pressing a note into her hand while the others dragged Isabella into a van. "They knew your name," she whispered. "They said you have 24 hours to pay 50,000 euros, or she vanishes forever." A cold fury gripped William. He knew money wasn't their real hunger. It was cruelty, control. Still, he had no choice but to comply. That night, he withdrew the funds, each bill tainted with dread. At midnight, his phone rang. A blocked number. The bearded man's voice slithered across the line. "We have her. If you want her alive, bring 100,000 to the docks in Barcelona." Alone, Clara begged him to alert the police, but William shook his head. "If we involve them, she's gone." Powerless though he felt, determination burned brighter. He would not fail her. The night was heavy when he arrived at the Barcelona docks. Rusted containers loomed in silence, the sea air sharp with brine and diesel. He carried a duffel bag of cash, footsteps echoing like a metronome of dread. Inside a warehouse lit by a single flickering bulb, he found her. Isabella sat tied to a chair, her cheeks streaked with tears, her face pale. Yet when her eyes found his, relief sparked. "Mr. William," she whispered. "Let her go," he demanded, voice steady though his fists tightened on the bag. From the shadows, the bearded man emerged, flanked by 2 accomplices. "Do you have it?" William tossed the bag. 80,000. The rest when she's safe." The man sneered. "Do you think we bargain with lives, Carter?" "The girl's worth far more. Pretty, clever. She'll fetch a high price elsewhere if you don't meet our terms." The words twisted deep. William stepped forward, but before he could speak, Isabella's voice cut through the tension. "You can't sell me," she said, calm and sharp, "because I know who you are." The man stiffened. "I heard you talking," she continued, eyes blazing. "Your name is Mark Riley. You live on Blossom Lane. You have a daughter at St. Francis School." Color drained from his face. Rage flickered in his eyes. "And you," she turned to the second, "John Davis. Your mother's in a Naples hospital. Would she be proud if she knew what you really do?" The room shifted. The men faltered, shaken by a child's memory-turned weapon. Even William was stunned by her defiance. Then, faint but growing, sirens. Clara had betrayed his instructions and called the authorities. Panic rippled through the men. "This isn't over," Riley snarled, slicing through the ropes before bolting into the night. William rushed forward, gathering Isabella into his arms. She clung to him, trembling. "I knew you would come," she whispered. He held her close, voice thick. "No one will ever take you from me again." Minutes later, the police stormed the warehouse. The kidnappers were gone, leaving only shadows. But Isabella, though shaken, stood beside William with her head lifted high, proof that even in the grip of fear she had found her voice. She had faced terror and turned it back with nothing but her courage, her sharp mind, and her will to survive. And in that moment, William realized she was no longer just a frightened child needing rescue. She had saved him as well, pulling him out of the hollow loneliness that had defined his existence. That night, as they drove away from the port of Barcelona, Isabella drifted into sleep against his shoulder, her breathing soft and steady. William stared out at the shimmering city lights and the dark stretch of sea beyond, and for the first time in his life, everything was clear. What bound them together was not duty, not circumstance, but love, raw, undeniable, unshakable. He knew then that his fight was no longer about fear or obligation. It was about family, about never letting her face the world alone. And he silently vowed he would battle for that right, for her, for as long as he breathed. 6 weeks later, the Carter estate no longer echoed with emptiness. Its once cold halls rang with laughter, footsteps, and the endless stream of questions from a child discovering the world anew. Isabella had transformed before his eyes. The dull shadows of fear were gone from her face, replaced with the glow of health and the sparkle of newfound confidence. Her hair caught the sunlight in gentle waves, her cheeks flushed with color, and her dreams, spoken aloud with trust, gave William something he had not felt in decades: hope. On the morning of the adoption hearing in Paris, William stood at his mirror, adjusting his tie. For a man known for unshakable composure, his hands betrayed him, trembling with anticipation. This was the day he would not simply protect her, he would truly become her father. When Isabella burst into the room in a pale blue dress, the very one she had once pressed her nose against a shop window to admire, his throat tightened. She spun with a grin. "Do I look all right?" "Perfect," he whispered, lowering himself to her height. "Absolutely perfect." In the Paris courthouse, the chamber's grandeur seemed to dwarf her at first. But when the judge asked where she wished to live, Isabella lifted her chin and spoke without hesitation. "With Mr. William. With my dad." The word trembled in the air, fragile yet powerful. Tears blurred his vision as the final gavel fell, sealing what his heart already knew. When the papers were placed into his hands, they weighed more than any contract of wealth or power he had ever signed. This was not business. This was belonging. Even Victoria, his sister, who had once scolded him and warned of scandal, could not deny the change. She had come to Paris out of obligation, but as she bent to embrace Isabella, her carefully crafted mask cracked into warmth. "You're a family now," she whispered, and this time she meant it. Back in Monaco, the mansion slowly shifted from a fortress of solitude into a true home. The sterile perfection gave way to scattered books, crayons taped to the refrigerator, the echo of a soccer ball in the garden. William no longer sealed himself away in his study for endless hours. He walked Isabella to school, helped her with her homework, and, perhaps the greatest change, listened to her stories with patient attention. Once she had wanted nothing more than a corner of safety. Now she carried the certainty that she would never again be turned away. But William's gaze reached beyond his estate. He could not ignore the truth Isabella had forced him to see. Countless children still wandered streets without a haven. In her honor, he founded Isabella's Haven, a network of shelters across Europe offering warmth, dignity, and education. The first opened in Naples, near the very orphanage she had once fled. At the ribbon cutting, Isabella held his hand tightly, pride shining in her eyes. As the crowd applauded, she leaned close. "We're helping them, aren't we?" He smiled down. "Yes, because you showed me how." Evenings at the estate became sacred rituals. Sometimes they sat together in the garden, watching the Mediterranean blaze orange under the setting sun, Isabella tucked safely at his side. Sometimes Clara Rossi joined them, her companionship deepening into something more as she witnessed the bond of father and daughter blossom. Together, the three of them dreamed of new projects, new ways to reach children who needed exactly what Isabella had once begged for in a trembling voice: just a place to stay until the storm passed. One quiet evening, Isabella tugged gently at William's hand, pulling him toward a quiet corner of the garden. It was the very spot where, once upon a stormy night, the rain had soaked through her clothes and left her trembling in despair. Now, in its place, stood a small wooden structure. It was a doghouse, rebuilt with clean timber, painted in crisp white and surrounded by a neat circle of flowers that Isabella herself had planted with care. At its front was a small plaque, carved with delicate letters: "For every child still searching for a home, and for those who have found one." William sank down beside her, his arm draping protectively across her small shoulders. His voice softened as memories pressed close. "You asked me once for a doghouse," he whispered. Isabella's eyes glistened, the reflection of twilight stars dancing in them. She nodded slowly. "But you gave me a home." "No," William murmured, his voice breaking with emotion. "You gave me one. You gave me family." As the last of the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars glimmered in the violet sky, William realized that the storm that had carried Isabella to his door had never been a curse. It had been a blessing, tearing down the walls of his solitude and filling his life with the one thing he had long believed forever out of reach: love. From that night onward, the Carter estate ceased to be a cold mansion belonging to a solitary billionaire. It became a living home, a place where silence was conquered by laughter, where light footsteps ran through corridors once echoing with emptiness, and where a desperate question asked in the rain had blossomed into a legacy that would outlive them both. On quiet evenings, Isabella often returned to the same question. She would curl up beside him and whisper, "Tell me the story again. The storm, the question, the open door." And William would tell it, not as a memory of pity or rescue, but as the very moment his life truly began. For love does not always enter with grandeur. Sometimes it begins with a child standing in the rain, whispering the most extraordinary words. "Can I stay?" From that first night when Isabella appeared on William Carter's doorstep, drenched and trembling, to the day she spun proudly in her blue dress in a Paris courtroom, their journey had carried them through storms, fears, and victories. What began as a plea for shelter in a doghouse had grown into a story that redefined home, family, and the quiet courage of the human heart. Isabella's transformation, from a hungry, frightened child surviving on scraps to a cherished daughter, was not born of wealth but of love, pure and steadfast. William, once a man encased in marble walls and silence, learned that his worth was not measured in contracts or empires, but in the smile of the little girl who finally knew she belonged. He had fought men who tried to take her, endured the doubts of Victoria, and faced the agony of her kidnapping. And every time, he chose her. In return, Isabella revealed a courage beyond her years, using her wits to outsmart her captors, holding her ground when fear should have broken her. Together, they had created more than a family. They had created a legacy. Isabella's haven grew into a beacon of hope across Europe, a promise that no child should ever again stand in the rain without shelter. It proved that while cruelty existed, compassion could rise stronger, echoing outward to touch countless lives. Their story became a living testament that the smallest acts of kindness, a question, an open door, could change everything. And what do we learn from them? That love and responsibility are conscious choices we make each day. That true wealth is not stored in banks, but in the lives we heal and uplift. That even when storms rage, each of us can be the shelter someone desperately needs. Perhaps not all of us will build foundations or estates, but all of us can pause, listen, and choose compassion when indifference would be easier. Isabella and William remind us that family is not bound by blood, but by choice, by loyalty, by love against all odds. That courage is not always a grand gesture. It can be the quiet strength to stay, to protect, to love through the darkest moments. And they remind us that what first feels like a burden can, in truth, be the greatest gift of our lives. If this story touched your heart, I would love to hear what part resonated most with you. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters. And if you wish to continue receiving stories that inspire and remind us of our shared humanity, please like, subscribe, and stay with us. Together, we can carry forward these messages of love and hope to reach even more hearts.